Towards the end of the semester in my discrete math class, our professor Mr. Stevens started telling us about something called group theory. It used letters like X and Y, but unlike regular algebra, they didn't just stand for numbers. Instead, they represented some kind of objects that could be combined to make other objects. I don't really know, it pretty much went over my head. But then, things started to get weird. One day Mr. Stevens didn't show up to class. Instead, a strange man in a dark cloak came in and started teaching. He told us that group theory was more than just a mathematical concept. It was a way to control reality itself. The man, who called himself the operator, explained that the objects represented by X and Y were actually elements of the universe. By combining them in certain ways, we could create new elements, or even alter the fabric of reality. At first I was sure this was just some really weird practical joke. But then the operator started demonstrating his powers. He made a small model of a car appear out of thin air just by writing some symbols on the board. It was like he was casting a spell. As the semester went on, things got even weirder. Some of my classmates started disappearing. They would just vanish from the classroom, never to be seen again. The operator told us that they had become part of the group, whatever that meant. Then one day, I saw one of my friends in the hallway. He looked terrified and was covered in strange symbols. He told me that he had been trapped in a parallel dimension, a world where everything was made of equations and logic. He told me that the operator was trying to merge our world with that one, and that we were all in danger. I knew I had to stop him. I gathered a group of my classmates who still remembered the real world. We studied the group theory books, trying to find a way to reverse the operator's spells. Finally, on the last day of class, we confronted the operator. We used our knowledge of group theory to create a counterspell, and it worked. The operator was banished back to the parallel dimension, and our friends were returned to us. But I still have nightmares about that semester. I see the operator's equations in my dreams, and I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for another chance to merge the worlds. I never thought math could be so terrifying. It was my first semester of abstract algebra in grad school, and we were going over something called Lagrange's theorem. The professor, Dr. Richards, a tall, thin man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes, was explaining the theorem in his usual dry, monotonous voice. Lagrange's theorem states that the order of any subgroup of a finite group divides the order of the group. It was a fairly straightforward concept, but something about the way Dr. Richards was explaining it gave me the chills. After class, I went to the library to study. As I sat down with my textbook, I noticed a group of students huddled around a table in the corner. They were whispering excitedly, and I couldn't help but overhear bits of their conversation. "Did you hear about the professor who disappeared last semester?" one of them asked. "They say he was working on some kind of secret project involving group theory." "Yeah, and they never found his body," another chimed in. "Some people think he was murdered because of what he discovered." I tried to ignore them and focus on my studies, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to do some research on Lagrange's theorem and the professor who had disappeared, and what I found was unsettling. According to the university archives, the professor had been working on a groundbreaking theorem that would revolutionize the field of group theory. But his research had been stolen, and he had vanished without a trace. The police had found no evidence of foul play, but the rumors persisted. As the semester went on, I noticed that Dr. Richards was becoming increasingly erratic. He would mutter to himself during lectures, and sometimes even stop mid-sentence, staring off into space with a haunted look in his eyes. I began to suspect that he knew more about the missing professor than he was letting on. One night, as I was studying in the library, I saw Dr. Richards walk past my table. He was muttering to himself again, but this time I could make out some of the words. The theorem, it's all connected. The groups, the subgroups. I decided to follow him. He led me to a hidden room in the basement of the math building, a room I had never seen before. Inside, there were stacks of papers and books, all covered in complex equations and diagrams. Dr. Richards turned to me, his eyes wild. "You want to know the truth, don't you?" he asked. "The truth about Lagrange's theorem and what it means?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Lagrange's theorem is just the beginning," he said. "There are deeper, darker theorems out there, theorems that can be used to manipulate reality itself. And the people who know about them, they'll stop at nothing to keep them secret." With that, he pulled out a notebook and began to write furiously. I could see the equations and diagrams forming on the page, but They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They seemed to twist and warp, bending the very fabric of reality. And then, with a sudden flash of light, Dr. Richards disappeared. I was left alone in the room, surrounded by the professor's research. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something that was beyond my understanding, something that could change the world or destroy it. I left the room and never spoke of what I had seen, but the memory of that night, and the fear that came with it, stayed with me for the rest of my life. Our high school calculus teacher, Mr. Bradley, was one of those teachers who liked to go above and beyond the syllabus and try to inspire us with bits of different material. Though I wasn't sure what it was called at the time, we actually went over some group theory, at least the very basics. I remember he had us come up with a Cayley table for the cyclic group of 3 elements. It started innocently enough. We were just a group of high school students, eager to learn but also ready to move on to the weekend. Mr. Bradley, with his slightly unkempt hair and a penchant for wearing mismatched socks, always tried to make our lessons more interesting. "Today, we're going to do something a little different," he announced one day, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "We're going to learn about something called group theory." The class groaned. Group theory? Wasn't this something for college students or mathematicians? "Trust me, it's not as boring as it sounds," Mr. Bradley said, ignoring our protests. "In fact, it can be quite thrilling." And so, he began to explain the basics of group theory, starting with the concept of a group itself. A group, he told us, was a set of elements that could be combined using an operation that followed certain rules. "Think of it like a secret society," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Each member has a role, and they work together to achieve a common goal." We were intrigued. Mr. Bradley had a way of making even the most abstract concepts seem exciting. He then introduced us to the concept of a Cayley table, a way of representing the operation of a group. He asked us to create a Cayley table for a specific group, the cyclic group of 3 elements. "It's like a puzzle," he said, handing out sheets of paper. "You need to figure out how the elements of the group interact with each other." We got to work, scribbling down numbers and symbols, trying to make sense of the seemingly random patterns. As we worked, the classroom seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening in the corners. "Remember," Mr. Bradley said, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "in group theory, everything is connected. Every element has its place, and if you remove one, the whole structure collapses." We shivered, suddenly feeling a chill in the air. The atmosphere in the room had changed. It was no longer a safe classroom, but a place of secrets and hidden truths. As we finished our Cayley tables, a strange feeling came over us. It was as if we had unlocked a door to a world we had never known existed. A world where numbers and symbols held power, where patterns could predict the future, and where the slightest mistake could have catastrophic consequences. "Well done," Mr. Bradley said, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You've taken your first steps into the world of group theory, but remember, with knowledge comes responsibility. Use it wisely." And with that, he turned off the lights and left the room, leaving us alone in the darkness, our minds buzzing with questions and our hearts pounding with fear. In college, I took this elective about public speaking, and for one of our speeches, we could pick from a list of topics. I unwittingly chose group theory, which I thought had something to do with how people talked to each other and made groups. Little did I know it actually had to do with mathematics. The more I researched the topic, the more fascinated I became. Group theory, it turned out, was a branch of abstract algebra that dealt with the study of groups, mathematical structures that consist of a set of elements equipped with an operation that combines any 2 elements to form a third element. My presentation ended up being a success. I explained the concept of groups, their properties, and applications in various fields like cryptography and coding theory. The class was intrigued, and my professor was impressed. But that night, something strange happened. I started seeing patterns everywhere I looked. In the arrangement of leaves on the trees, the arrangement of tiles on the floor, and even in the arrangement of stars in the sky. They all seemed to follow the rules of group theory. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but the patterns became more and more elaborate. I began to see them even in the most mundane things, like the arrangement of books on my shelf, or the arrangement of grains of sand on the beach. Then I started seeing the patterns in people's behavior. The way they moved, the way they talked, the way they interacted with each other. All seemed to follow the rules of group theory. I tried to tell my friends about it, but they just laughed it off as a joke. They said I was just seeing things because I had been studying group theory too much, but I knew it was more than that. The patterns were everywhere, and they were getting more complex by the day. I couldn't escape them. They started to consume my thoughts, my dreams, my entire life. I tried to stop studying group theory, but it was too late. The patterns were already ingrained in my mind. They were a part of me, and I was a part of them. I realized that group theory wasn't just a mathematical concept, it was a fundamental law of the universe. And I had stumbled upon it, unwittingly, in a public speaking class. From that day on, I saw the world in a completely different way. I saw the patterns everywhere, and they filled me with both awe and terror. I knew I had unlocked a secret of the universe, and it was both beautiful and terrifying. In the end, I realized that some knowledge is better left undiscovered. Some truths are too powerful, too overwhelming, to be known. And group theory was one of them. I went to high school with this rather nerdy kid named Alex who would randomly spout off math trivia. One day at lunch, he mentioned something about the monster group. Of course, I had no idea what he was talking about, and neither did anyone else. Alex had a knack for making even the simplest concepts sound incredibly complex, and this was no exception. The monster group is a really special group in group theory, he began, his eyes lighting up with excitement. It's a finite simple group, but it still has a ton of elements. It was discovered in the late 70s by a bunch of mathematicians, and it's pretty much the largest sporadic simple group. I nodded, pretending to understand what he was saying. I knew Alex loved to talk about math, but I had no idea what a sporadic group was, or a simple group, or why it mattered. Anyway, he continued, the monster group is really mysterious. Some people think it might be connected to the structure of the universe, or even the fabric of reality itself. There are these crazy theories that it could be used to unlock the secrets of dark matter, or even create wormholes. I laughed nervously, not really knowing what else to do. That sounds pretty wild, Alex. Are you sure you're not just making this up? He shook his head, his expression serious. No, I'm not. The monster group is real, and it's really important in math. But there's something else, something I haven't told anyone else. I leaned in, honestly intrigued. What is it? Alex glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. I've been studying the monster group on my own, and I think I've found something. Something that could change everything. Even though I was nobody's mathematician, my heart started to race. What do you mean? I think I've discovered a way to communicate with the monster group, he whispered. I stared at him, not sure if he was joking or not. You mean like, talk to it? He nodded. I know it sounds crazy, but I think the monster group is more than just a mathematical concept. I think it's alive. I had zero idea of what to say. Alex had always been a little eccentric, but this was something else entirely. I've been working on a program, he continued, pulling out a flash drive. It's a way to interact with the monster group, to ask it questions and get answers. I stared down at the device he held in his hand and shook my head. Alex, you can't be serious. This is nuts. He looked hurt. I know it sounds crazy, but I need your help. I need someone to test it with me, someone I trust. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to help my friend, but another part was scared. What if he was right? What if the monster group was more than just a mathematical concept? Please, he begged. I need to know if this is real. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Alex plugged the flash drive into his laptop and opened the program. The screen was filled with a complex, swirling pattern that seemed to pulse with energy. Ask it something, he urged. I took a deep breath. What's the meaning of life? The screen flickered, and a series of numbers and symbols appeared. Alex's eyes widened as he read them. It's responding, he whispered. I felt a chill run down my spine. What had we gotten ourselves into? I decided to take an abstract algebra class in college, even though I was an undergrad and wasn't actually a math major. It seemed like a good way to challenge myself and explore a different field of study. Little did I know, it would turn out to be one of the scariest decisions I ever made. The professor, Dr. E, was an eccentric man with wild hair and a penchant for cryptic lectures. He spoke in riddles and seemed to delight in confusing his students, but there was something about him that drew me in, like a moth to a flame. As the semester progressed, I found myself becoming more and more engrossed in the world of abstract algebra. The concepts were mind-bending, and the problems were like puzzles that I couldn't resist trying to solve. But the deeper I went, the more unsettling things became. One night, as I was studying in the library, I stumbled upon an old book that Dr. E had recommended. It was called The Geometry of Shadows, and it was unlike any math textbook I had ever seen. The pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams that seemed to shift and change before my eyes. As I flipped through the book, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the book was speaking to me, whispering secrets that were never meant to be shared. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to uncover its dark secrets. From that night on, strange things began to happen. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with the feeling that I had been reciting equations in my sleep. My dreams were filled with abstract patterns and eerie whispers that seemed to come from the very fabric of the universe itself. And then there were the disappearances. Students in the class started to vanish without a trace. At first it was just a few, but soon it became clear that something sinister was at work. The whole campus was gripped with fear, and rumors began to circulate about a secret society of mathematicians who had unlocked the secrets of the universe and were using them to control the minds of others. I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. With the help of a few brave friends, I began to investigate the disappearances and the strange occurrences that seemed to follow Dr. E wherever he went. What we discovered was beyond our wildest nightmares. Dr. E was a member of a cult that worshipped a mysterious entity known only as the Prime Mover. They believed that the universe was a complex mathematical equation and that by solving it, they could gain unimaginable power. But the cost was steep, the lives of innocent students who were sacrificed to appease the Prime Mover. As we delved deeper into the cult's dark secrets, we realized that we were in over our heads. The cult was powerful and far-reaching, and it seemed that there was no escape. But we couldn't give up. We had to stop them before they claimed more innocent lives. In the end, we managed to expose the cult and put an end to their sinister plans, but the scars of that semester would never truly heal. The world of abstract algebra had shown me a glimpse of the dark side of mathematics, and I would never look at a simple equation the same way again. Back when I was a kid, maybe 12 or 13, I found this book on abstract algebra in one of those little free lending libraries. At the time, I had zero clue what any of it meant, but I remember being fascinated by some of the diagrams it contained. There were these intricate patterns, like webs of lines and circles, that seemed to represent something deeper, something hidden in the fabric of the universe. One diagram in particular caught my attention. It was a simple circle, divided into 4 equal parts, each labeled with the letter A, B, C, and D. The center of the circle was marked with an asterisk, and the caption read, "The Fourfold Symmetry Group." I didn't know what a symmetry group was, but I liked the sound of it. It made me think of secret societies and ancient knowledge. I took the book home and tried to read it, but the words were like a foreign language to me. I couldn't make sense of the equations or the theorems, but I kept going back to that diagram, tracing the lines with my finger, wondering what it all meant. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a noise outside my window. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on glass. I got up and looked out, but there was nothing there, just the dark, empty street and the moon shining down. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. I tried to ignore it, but it was like it was calling to me. I opened the window and leaned out, trying to see where the sound was coming from. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the street, its face shrouded in darkness. It was holding a book, and as I watched, it opened it to the page with the fourfold symmetry group diagram. The figure raised its hand and pointed at the center of the circle, at the asterisk. And then it spoke. Its voice was like a whisper, but it filled my head, echoing into my thoughts. "Join us," it said. "Join the fourfold symmetry group. Become one with the universe." I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. The figure was still there, still pointing at the diagram, still whispering those words. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in fear, but eventually the figure disappeared and the tapping stopped. I closed the window and crawled back into bed, pulling the covers over my head. I never saw the figure again, but I never forgot that night. I never forgot the fourfold symmetry group, or the diagram that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. And even now, years later, I sometimes wonder if I made the right choice, if I shouldn't have joined them, become one with the universe. But in the end, I'll never know, and that's what scares me the most. One day in my abstract algebra class, we are covering the Silo theorems, which apparently are like a converse to Lagrange's theorem. The professor, a tall, gaunt man with piercing eyes, had an unsettling way of explaining mathematical concepts, making even the most straightforward theorems sound ominous. As he delved deeper into the intricacies of the Silo theorems, I noticed that the room seemed to darken, and the air grew heavy with an eerie silence. The professor's voice took on a strange, hypnotic quality as he spoke of the Silo P subgroups and their mysterious properties. It was then that I realized something was amiss. The other students in the class, once lively and engaged, now sat frozen in their seats, their eyes glazed over as if in a trance. I tried to stand up, to break the spell, but found that I, too, was rooted to my chair. The professor's voice grew louder, filling the room with an otherworldly sound. He spoke of a hidden dimension, a realm of pure mathematics where the Silo theorems reigned supreme. In this dimension, he claimed, the theorems were not mere abstractions, but living entities, powerful and malevolent. As he spoke, the room seemed to warp and twist, the walls dissolving into a swirling vortex of numbers and symbols. I felt myself being pulled into the vortex, my mind overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of the mathematical landscape. I awoke with a start, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was as it had been before, the professor still droning on about the Silo theorems. But as I looked around, I saw that the other students were still frozen, their eyes blank and unseeing. I realized then that the professor had opened a door to a realm beyond our own, a realm where the Silo theorems held sway. And I knew that I had to find a way to close that door before it was too late, and before the theorems consumed us all. Back when I first found out about abstract algebra, I thought I had made a breakthrough. I was a graduate student, eager to impress my professors with my knowledge of group theory. I had spent countless hours poring over textbooks, trying to understand the intricacies of this fascinating branch of mathematics. One day, as I was deep in thought, staring at a particularly complex equation, I had a sudden insight. It was as if a light bulb had gone off in my head, illuminating the path to a groundbreaking discovery. I scribbled furiously on my notepad, my hand barely able to keep up with the thoughts racing through my mind. Excitedly, I ran to my advisor's office, eager to share my revelation, but as I explained my theory, a strange look came over his face. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. I nodded, confident in my work, but as the days passed, I began to notice strange occurrences. My equations, once so clear and precise, started to become muddled and confused. I would wake up in the middle of the night, seemingly for no reason, drenched in sweat, with a sense of foreboding hanging over me. As I delved deeper into my research, I started to uncover a dark secret. It seemed that the very foundations of group theory were built upon a lie, a twisted perversion of the truth. The more I learned, the more I realized that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could ever have imagined. My advisor, once so supportive, now seemed distant and aloof. I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move. I knew that I had to keep my discovery a secret, for fear of what might happen if the truth were to come out. But as the days turned into weeks, I could no longer ignore the gnawing sense of dread that had taken root in my heart. I knew that I had to find a way to undo what I had done, to set things right before it was too late. And so, I began to work on a new theory, one that would correct the mistakes of my past. But as I delved deeper into the darkness, I could feel the shadows closing in around me. I knew that I was playing with fire, and that one wrong move could cost me everything. In the end, I realized that some secrets are best left buried, for the truth, when revealed, can be more terrifying than any monster or ghost. And so, I closed my notebook and walked away, never looking back. But the memory of that fateful day, when I thought I had made a breakthrough, still haunts me. One day in abstract algebra class, we were going over abelian groups, which are groups where the operation works the same in either order. The professor, Dr. Reinhardt, was a brilliant but eccentric man, known for his unconventional teaching methods. As he paced the front of the lecture hall, he began to weave a tale about the dark side of group theory. "Imagine," he said, his voice low and foreboding, "a world where abelian groups held the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe. A world where the laws of physics were nothing more than a mathematical construct, and those who could imagine the groups held unimaginable power." The class listened, enraptured, as Dr. Reinhardt continued. In this world, there was a group of mathematicians who had discovered the ultimate abelian group. They call themselves the Order of the Abelian, and they believe that by harnessing the power of this group, they could control the very fabric of reality itself. As the story unfolded, the classroom seemed to grow darker, the air thick with tension. Dr. Reinhardt spoke of a student who had stumbled upon the Order's secret and how they had been forced to flee for their life. He described the student's harrowing journey, pursued by the Order's agents, who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But the student was clever, Dr. Reinhardt said, a hint of admiration in his voice. They realized that the key to defeating the Order lay in understanding the very group that had given them their power. By manipulating the group's properties, the student was able to turn the Order's own weapon against them, ultimately defeating them and saving the world from their tyranny. The class was silent as Dr. Reinhardt finished his tale, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, with a mischievous grin, he clapped his hands and said, "Now, let's get back to the lecture, shall we?" As the class resumed their study of abelian groups, the students couldn't help but glance nervously at the professor, wondering if there was more to his story than just a tale to keep them engaged. And as they left the lecture hall that day, each of them couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spine, wondering if the Order of the Abelian was really just a work of fiction, or if there was a kernel of truth hidden within Dr. Reinhardt's tale. One night in college, I had to stay up late working on some of my proofs for our group theory class. The professor had assigned a particularly challenging problem set, and I was determined to crack it before the next class. Luckily, the dorm was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional creak of the old building settling. However, as I pored over my notes and textbooks, I felt a growing sense of unease. It was as if someone was watching me, studying my every move. I shook it off, chalking it up to nerves in the late hour. But the feeling persisted, and soon I couldn't focus on my work at all. I decided to take a break and stretch my legs. As I wandered down the dimly lit hallway, I heard a soft shuffling sound behind me. I turned, but there was nothing there. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. Back in my room, I tried to focus on my proofs again, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but the room was empty, save for my books and papers. I tried to ignore the feeling and return to my work, but it was no use. I couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled over me. I decided to call it a night and try to get some sleep. As I lay in bed, the feeling of being watched only intensified. I tossed and turned, unable to find peace. And then, in the darkness, I saw it, a faint, shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure moved closer, its features slowly coming into focus. It was a man, his face twisted in a grimace of pain and anger. I recognized him from the textbook I had been studying. He was one of the mathematicians who had made significant contributions to group theory. The figure reached out towards me, and I felt a cold, clammy hand on my arm. I tried to pull away, but I was frozen in place. The figure leaned in close, and I could feel its breath on my face. "You're close," it whispered, "but you're missing something important." I awoke with a start, drenched in sweat. It was just a dream, I told myself. But as I looked around my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, and the shadows seemed to be moving on their own. I glanced at my proofs, and that's when I saw it, a small, barely noticeable error in my calculations. I corrected it, and suddenly everything fell into place. The feeling of dread that had plagued me all night dissipated, and I was able to get some much-needed rest. But even now, years later, I can't help but wonder, was it really just a dream? Or was there something more sinister at play, something that only those who delve too deeply into the mysteries of group theory can truly understand? On the first day of our abstract algebra class, our professor Dr. Sandeep had us do this little arts and crafts project to help get acquainted with the symmetries of the various polygons. We were each given a stack of colored paper and a pair of scissors. Our task was to create symmetrical designs using the paper and scissors, with each design representing a different type of symmetry. As we worked, Dr. Sandeep walked around the room, observing our progress and offering guidance. He seemed particularly interested in the designs of one student, a quiet girl named Lily who sat in the back corner of the room. Her designs were intricate and beautiful, with a level of detail that seemed almost impossible given the limited materials we had been provided. After class, Dr. Sandeep pulled Lily aside and asked her to stay behind. When the other students had left, he closed the door and turned to her with a serious expression. "Your designs are very impressive," he said, "but there's something about them that concerns me. The symmetries you've created, they're not just mathematical. They're real, and they're dangerous." Lily was taken aback. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Your designs are representations of forbidden symmetries," Dr. Sandeep explained. "Symmetries that, if realized in the real world, could have catastrophic consequences. You've tapped into something powerful, Lily, something that could threaten the very fabric of reality." Lily was skeptical. "But it's just a class project," she protested. "How could my designs cause any real harm?" Dr. Sandeep shook his head. "You don't understand the true nature of the symmetries you've uncovered. They're like a virus, spreading through the mathematical structure of the universe. If they're allowed to grow unchecked, they could unravel the very principles that hold our world together." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. She had always been fascinated by the abstract beauty of mathematics, but she never imagined that her designs could pose a real threat. "What can I do?" she asked. "You must destroy your designs," Dr. Sandeep said. "Burn them, tear them apart, scatter the ashes to the wind. Only then can we hope to contain the damage." Lily hesitated, her fingers lingering over a stack of colorful papers. She had poured so much of herself into those designs, and the thought of destroying them felt like a betrayal. But as she looked into Dr. Sandeep's eyes, she saw the fear and urgency there. With a heavy heart, she gathered her papers and walked to the nearest trash can. She took a deep breath, then began to tear the designs into tiny pieces, watching the symmetrical patterns fall apart in her hands. As the last scrap of paper fluttered into the trash, Lily felt a strange sense of relief. The forbidden symmetries were gone, and with them, the threat they posed to the world. But as she looked around the empty classroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air seemed to hum with a faint, unsettling vibration, as if the very fabric of reality had been altered by her actions. From that day on, Lily was haunted by the memory of her forbidden designs. She never spoke of them to anyone, not even Dr. Sandeep after that first day. But she knew that she would never forget the day she learned the true power of group theory and the terrifying consequences of tampering with the symmetries of the universe. Back in grad school, me and my group of friends went to our share of parties, and one time my friend Brian actually got drunk and tried to describe group theory to us using the pizza we were eating as an analogy. "Okay guys, listen up," Brian slurred, waving a half-eaten slice of pizza in the air. "Imagine this pizza is a group, right? And the toppings are elements of the group." We all chuckled, but Brian was actually dead serious. He took another bite of his pizza, then continued. "So, the operation of the group is like putting toppings on the pizza. You can combine toppings to make new toppings, just like you can combine elements to get new elements." "That's actually not a bad analogy," I said, intrigued despite myself. Brian nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Exactly. Just like a group has an identity element, this pizza has a base layer that doesn't change the toppings when you add it." "So what about inverses?" someone asked. Brian grinned. "That's where it gets interesting. See, the inverse of a topping is like taking it off the pizza. If you put pepperoni on and then take it off, you're back to where you started, just like with inverses in group theory." We were all fascinated now, leaning in to hear more. Brian was actually on a roll. "And then there's the whole thing about subgroups. A subgroup is like a smaller pizza that still has all the properties of the bigger one. You can't just take off a few toppings and call it a subgroup, you know. It has to be a complete, self-contained pizza." "Brian, you're a genius," someone said, and we all laughed, but we were also kind of impressed. Brian finished his pizza and leaned back, looking satisfied. "Group theory is everywhere, guys, even in our pizza." We all toasted to that, and then someone turned up the music and the party went on. However, I couldn't help thinking about pizza toppings and group theory for the rest of the night. It was the late afternoon, and I was sitting in a group theory class, trying to wrap my head around the concept of conjugation. Professor Henderson was drawing diagrams on the board, explaining how elements could be transformed by conjugation. It was all very abstract, and I was struggling to keep up. As the class ended, I packed up my things and headed out into the cool autumn air. I walked across campus, lost in thought, trying to make sense of the lecture. That's when I noticed something strange. A figure was following me, always just out of sight, but I could feel their presence. I quickened my pace, but the figure kept up. I turned down a narrow alley, hoping to lose them, but they followed me. I broke into a run, but it was no use. the figure caught up to me, and I turned to face them. It was Professor Henderson, but something was different. His eyes were dark and empty, and he spoke in a voice that wasn't his own. "You've been chosen," he said. Chosen? For what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "To understand conjugation," he replied, "to see the true power of group theory." He grabbed my arm, and I felt a strange sensation, like I was being pulled apart and put back together. When I opened my eyes, I was in a different place, a dark, shadowy realm filled with strange symbols and equations. I tried to move, but I was trapped. The figure that was once Professor Henderson stood before me. "Welcome to the world of conjugation," he said. "Here, the rules are different. Here, you will learn what it truly means to be transformed." I spent what felt like an eternity in that realm, learning about the dark side of group theory. Conjugation was not just a mathematical concept, it was a power, a force that could be used for good or for evil. And as I learned, I realized that I had been chosen for a reason. When I finally returned to the real world, I was a changed person. I understood conjugation in a way that few others did, but I also knew that I had to use that knowledge wisely. For the power of conjugation was a double-edged sword, and in the wrong hands, it could be very dangerous indeed. One day my best friend Sarah and I went to the mall, and while walking around like we usually did, I decided to visit the bookstore to get a present for my nerdy little brother's birthday. He had recently become obsessed with a book called The Mysteries of Group Theory, and wouldn't stop talking about it. I figured a new book on the same topic would be the perfect gift. Sarah reluctantly agreed to come with me, even though she wasn't much of a reader. We wandered through the store, searching for the math section. As we turned a corner, we stumbled upon a small, dimly lit aisle that seemed oddly out of place. The air felt colder there, and the books had an eerie, worn-out appearance. I spotted the book my brother wanted, but as I reached for it, Sarah suddenly grabbed my arm. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to a dusty, leather-bound tome with strange symbols on the cover. The title read, "The Forbidden Equations of the Ancients." Curiosity piqued, I opened the book and began to read aloud the introduction. It spoke of an ancient group of mathematicians who had discovered a set of equations that could unlock the secrets of the universe. However, the knowledge came at a great cost, driving those who learned it to madness. As I read, the room seemed to grow darker, and the symbols on the book's cover began to glow faintly. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances, but we couldn't tear our eyes away from the page. The text spoke of a ritual that would allow the reader to access the forbidden knowledge, but it required a blood sacrifice. Suddenly, the bookshelf began to shake violently, and the books flew off the shelves, swirling around us like a tornado of paper and leather. Sarah screamed and tried to run, but the aisle had transformed into a seemingly endless corridor of ancient tomes and eldritch symbols. We were trapped, the only way out being to complete the ritual and gain the forbidden knowledge. As we stood there, frozen in fear, the glowing symbols on the book's cover seemed to whisper promises of power and enlightenment. But at what cost? Full disclosure, when I was getting my degree in math, I never thought I'd actually use group theory for anything in the real world. However, one day it came in handy, in possibly the strangest way imaginable. It all started when my friend, a fellow mathematician, invited me to a weekend getaway at his family's secluded cabin. The place was nestled deep in the woods, miles away from civilization. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to unwind and catch up on some reading. Little did I know, the cabin held a dark secret. The first night there, as we sat by the fireplace, my friend began to tell me about the cabin's history. It was built by a mathematician named Dr. Alistair Gray, who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. According to local legend, Dr. Gray had been obsessed with group theory and believed it held the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe. As the night grew darker, my friend pulled out a dusty old book from a hidden compartment in the cabin's wall. It was Dr. Gray's journal, filled with complex equations and diagrams that seemed to defy logic. My friend explained that he had found the journal years ago and had been trying to decipher it ever since. Intrigued, I began to study the journal. The more I read, the more I realized that Dr. Gray had been onto something. His equations seemed to describe a hidden symmetry in the universe, a pattern that, if understood, could grant unimaginable power. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The cabin creaked and groaned as if it was alive. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, but the feeling persisted. The next morning, I awoke to find my friend gone. I searched the cabin, but there was no sign of him. Panic set in as I realized that the journal was missing too. I knew I had to find him, and the only clue I had was Dr. Gray's journal. As I studied the journal again, I began to see a pattern. The equations seemed to form a map of the cabin and the surrounding woods. I realized that Dr. Gray had used group theory to create a hidden, interconnected network of paths and symbols throughout the property. I followed the map, my heart pounding as I ventured deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to whisper, and the shadows danced at the edge of my vision. Finally, I found my friend, but he wasn't alone. A group of hooded figures surrounded him, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. They were performing some sort of ritual, using the journal as a guide. I watched in horror as they began to transform, their bodies twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed the journal and began to recite the equations out loud, using group theory to disrupt the ritual. The hooded figures screamed as the power they had summoned turned against them. In the chaos, I managed to free my friend and escape the woods. We never spoke of that night again, but I knew that group theory had saved our lives. From then on, I never doubted the power of mathematics to shape our reality. I never knew someone could use math, let alone abstract algebra and group theory, to impress girls, but my friend Mike was a unique specimen. He was a genius, a quirky, endearing genius who could make even the most complex mathematical concepts sound like poetry. It was a chilly autumn evening when Mike invited me to his apartment for a small gathering. He had a new girlfriend, Sarah, and he wanted to introduce her to his closest friends. I arrived to find a cozy setting, with candles flickering and soft jazz playing in the background. Mike greeted me with a warm smile, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Sarah, this is my friend, the one I told you about," he said, gesturing towards me. I shook hands with Sarah, a beautiful brunette with a curious glint in her eyes. "Mike has told me so much about you," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "He says you're a great listener, especially when he talks about his work." As the evening progressed, Mike and Sarah seemed to be in their own little world. They talked about everything from art to literature, and then Mike started talking about his work. He spoke passionately about group theory and abstract algebra, his hands animating complex concepts as he spoke. "You see, Sarah," he said, "group theory is like a secret code that can unlock the mysteries of the universe. It's all about symmetry and transformations, about finding patterns in relationships and seemingly unrelated things." Sarah listened intently, her eyes fixed on Mike. I could see the admiration in her gaze, the way she was drawn to his intellect and passion. "That's fascinating," she said, her voice filled with genuine interest. "Tell me more." And so, Mike continued to talk about his work, weaving intricate stories about groups and symmetries, about the beauty and power of mathematics. I watched in amazement as Sarah was completely captivated by his words, her eyes shining with a mix of curiosity and wonder. But as the night wore on, something began to change. The air in the room grew heavy, the shadows seemed to deepen, and I started to feel a sense of unease. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt like something was off. Mike's stories took a darker turn. He spoke of a group that could manipulate reality, of symmetries that could bend the fabric of the universe. His voice grew low and intense, his eyes wide and wild. "And what if," he whispered, leaning closer into Sarah, "what if we could use these symmetries to change the world, to bend reality to our will?" Sarah's face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. "Mike, you're scaring me," she said, her voice trembling. But Mike didn't seem to hear her. He continued to talk, his words becoming more and more disjointed and frenzied. I could see the darkness in his eyes, a madness that seemed to consume him. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the night ended. Sarah excused herself, her face pale and her eyes haunted. I left soon after, feeling shaken and disturbed. The next day, I tried to call Mike, but there was no answer. I went to his apartment, but it was empty. There was also no trace of Sarah, and it was as if they had vanished into thin air. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night, but I can't help but wonder if Mike's obsession with group theory and abstract algebra had led him down a dark path, one that had consumed him and Sarah. And as I look at the world around me, I can't help but feel that there are hidden symmetries, hidden patterns that we can't see, that might just be waiting to be discovered. I never knew I could use group theory to help me pick out the ingredients to make the perfect pizza. or that doing so would go so horribly wrong and summon the evil King Pineapple. It all started innocently enough. I was a graduate student in mathematics, obsessed with group theory, and I had a craving for pizza. I figured, why not combine my two passions? I began by assigning each pizza ingredient to a group element. The base was the identity element, representing the foundation of the pizza. Toppings like cheese, pepperoni, and mushrooms were assigned to different cyclic subgroups, each with their own unique properties. I even included pineapple, which I assigned to a special subgroup known for its divisiveness among pizza lovers. As I started to arrange the toppings according to the rules of group theory, I noticed something strange. The more I experimented with different combinations, the more the pizza seemed to take on a life of its own. It was as if the toppings were rearranging themselves, forming patterns that I had never seen before. Then it happened. The pizza began to glow with an otherworldly light, and a portal opened above it. From the portal emerged the evil King Pineapple, ruler of the pineapple dimension. He had been summoned by the chaotic arrangement of toppings, which had inadvertently created a powerful incantation. King Pineapple was furious. He blamed me for disrupting the balance of the pizza universe and vowed to destroy me. I had no choice but to fight back. Using my knowledge of group theory, I quickly rearranged the toppings to form a new, more stable configuration. The portal began to close, but King Pineapple was already halfway through. In a desperate attempt to save myself, I grabbed the pizza and threw it at King Pineapple, hitting him square in the face. The impact caused the portal to collapse, trapping King Pineapple in the pizza dimension. I never used group theory to make pizza again, but I did learn a valuable lesson. Sometimes, even the most innocent of passions can lead to unexpected consequences. And I never looked at pineapple quite the same way again. I'm a math and playwright dual major. I've always been fascinated by the intricate beauty of group theory, how its abstract concepts could be applied to the real world. I was determined to use my knowledge to create something extraordinary, something that would leave a lasting impression on the world. I started writing an opera, one that would be based on the principles of group theory. I wanted to create a story that would resonate with people, a story that would show the beauty and power of mathematics. I poured my heart and soul into the script, crafting characters that would embody the different elements of group theory. As I worked on the opera, I found myself drawn to the lead actress. She was a vision of beauty and grace, with a voice that could melt even the coldest heart. I knew that she was the perfect fit for the role, and I was determined to make her fall in love with me through my work. The rehearsals were intense, but the results were stunning. The opera was a masterpiece, a perfect blend of mathematics and art. The lead actress shone like a star, her performance mesmerizing everyone who watched. After the final curtain call, I approached her backstage. I told her about my inspiration for the opera, about how group theory had helped me create something so beautiful. She listened intently, her eyes shining with admiration. "You're a genius," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This opera is like nothing I've ever seen before. It's truly a work of art." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "It's all thanks to you," I said. "You brought the opera to life. You made it real." She stepped closer, her eyes locked on mine. "No," she said softly. "It's all thanks to you. You created something incredible, something that will be remembered for generations. You made me fall in love with you, with your genius and your passion." I felt a rush of emotion, a feeling of joy and satisfaction that I had never experienced before. I had used group theory to create the perfect opera, and in doing so, I had found love. It was beautiful, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. It was an experience I would never forget. It was a cold, dark night, the kind that made the stars above seem like piercing eyes watching over the world. I sat alone in my office, surrounded by equations and blueprints that had become my only friends in the last few months. As a rocket scientist, I was used to solving complex problems, but this one had me stumped. My team and I had been working on a new type of rocket, one that would be able to travel faster and farther than any other before it. But the design just wouldn't come together. It was as if the laws of physics themselves were mocking me, refusing to bend to my will. Exhausted, I decided to call it a night. I laid down on the couch in my office, hoping that a few hours of sleep would clear my head. As I drifted off, I found myself in a strange, surreal landscape. The ground was made of numbers, and the sky was a tapestry of mathematical symbols. In the distance, I saw a figure approaching. as he got closer, I realized it was Elon Musk. He was dressed in a white robe, and his eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. "Why have you come here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I have come to guide you," Elon said, his voice echoing through the strange landscape. "You have the knowledge within you to solve your problem, but you must learn to see the world in a new way." He led me to a group of people standing in a circle. They were all rocket scientists like me, but they were working together, their minds connected in a way I had never seen before. "This is the power of group theory," Elon said, gesturing to the scientists. "It allows us to see the underlying patterns in the universe, to find connections that others cannot." As I watched, the scientists began to move, their actions perfectly synchronized. It was as if they were all part of a single, powerful machine. "Now it is your turn," Elon said, turning to me. "You must use group theory to solve your problem." I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I was back in my office. But something had changed. I could see the equations and blueprints in a new light, the numbers and symbols rearranging themselves in my mind. With newfound clarity, I began to work. I used group theory to find the connections between the different parts of the rocket, to see the underlying patterns that had been eluding me. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but finally, after what felt like an eternity, I had a breakthrough. The design came together, the equations finally making sense. When we launched the rocket, it was a success. It traveled faster and farther than any other before it, just as I had envisioned. And as I watched it disappear into the sky, I knew that I had Elon Musk to thank for my success. He had shown me the power of group theory, the ability to see the world in a new way, and with that knowledge, I had been able to solve the unsolvable, to create something truly extraordinary. As I looked up at the stars, I knew that I would never forget the lessons I learned on that strange, surreal landscape. And I knew that, with the power of group theory, there was nothing I couldn't achieve. One day towards the end of our group theory class, our professor Dr. Schmitz was filling out a table on the board of all the finite groups up to order 15. The class was almost over, and we were all eager to leave and enjoy the rest of the day. As Dr. Schmitz wrote down the last entry, he paused and turned to face us with a curious expression. "You know," he began, "group theory is not just about abstract mathematical structures. It's about symmetry, order, and patterns that exist all around us, even in places you wouldn't expect." He then proceeded to tell us a story that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was the early 1900s, and a group of mathematicians at a prestigious university had formed a secret society dedicated to exploring the esoteric connections between group theory and the occult. They believed that by understanding the deep symmetries of the universe, they could unlock hidden powers and knowledge beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. The society was led by a brilliant but eccentric professor named Dr. Heinrich Klein. He was obsessed with the idea that the finite groups he studied held the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe. Dr. Klein and his followers would meet in secret, performing strange rituals and experiments that they believed would allow them to tap into the power of these groups. One fateful night, Dr. Klein and his most trusted followers gathered in an abandoned chapel on the outskirts of the university. They had prepared a ritual that would, they believed, allow them to access the power of the Klein 4 group, a group of order 4 with a single non-identity element that is its own inverse. As the ritual reached its climax, the chapel was filled with an otherworldly energy. The air crackled with electricity, and the members of the society felt a surge of power coursing through their veins. But then, something went horribly wrong. The chapel was suddenly plunged into darkness, and the members of the society were enveloped in a suffocating sense of dread. When the lights flickered back on, they found themselves surrounded by grotesque, shadowy figures that seemed to have emerged from the very fabric of reality itself. The society had unwittingly opened a portal to another dimension, a realm of chaos and horror that existed beyond the boundaries of our own reality. The shadowy figures were the inhabitants of this nightmarish realm, and they had come to claim the souls of those who had disturbed their slumber. One by one, the members of the society were dragged screaming into the portal, their bodies and minds twisted and corrupted by the unspeakable horrors they encountered. Dr. Klein, realizing the enormity of his mistake, tried to close the portal, but it was too late. The shadowy figures had already begun to spread into our world, and there was no stopping them. Dr. Schmitz paused, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something. The society was never heard from again, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. but some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the screams of the damned echoing through the halls of the university. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but none of us moved. We sat there in stunned silence, the weight of Dr. Schmitz's story hanging heavy in the air. As we filed out of the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the world was no longer the same as it had been before. And as I walked home through the darkened streets, I couldn't help but wonder if the shadows that lurked in the corners of my vision were just my imagination, or if they were something far more sinister, something that had been unleashed by the foolish curiosity of a group of mathematicians who had delved too deeply into the mysteries of group theory. I know this sounds insane, but I actually think I can use group theory to explain all of David Lynch's movies and tie them all together. I've been a fan of his work for years, but it wasn't until recently that I started noticing the patterns and connections between his films. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that group theory might just hold the key to understanding the Lynchian universe. It all started when I was rewatching Eraserhead for the umpteenth time. As I watched Henry Spencer navigate the surreal nightmare of his life, I couldn't help but notice the recurring themes of identity, duality, and the blurred line between reality and fantasy. It reminded me of the concept of symmetry in group theory, where two elements are considered equivalent if they can be transformed into each other through a series of operations. As I delved deeper into Lynch's filmography, I started to see these symmetries everywhere. In Blue Velvet, the idyllic small-town facade is shattered by the dark underbelly of crime and corruption, revealing the duality of human nature. In Mulholland Drive, the line between reality and fantasy is blurred beyond recognition, as characters switch identities and the narrative twists and turns in on itself. But it was when I rewatched Twin Peaks that everything clicked into place. The show's complex web of characters, each with their own secrets and hidden agendas, reminded me of the concept of a group action in group theory. Each character is like an element in a group, and their interactions and relationships form a complex structure that can be analyzed and understood using the tools of group theory. I started to see patterns emerge as I applied group theory to Lynch's work. The symmetry between characters, the duality of their identities, and the complex web of relationships all seemed to fit within the framework of group theory. It was as if Lynch had been using the language of mathematics to tell his stories all along. But the more I studied, the more I realized that there was something else at play. The themes of identity, duality, and the blurred line between reality and fantasy were not just artistic choices, but fundamental aspects of the human experience. In group theory, with its focus on symmetry, structure, and relationships, provided a perfect framework for exploring these themes. I know it sounds insane, but I truly believe that group theory can be used to explain and tie together all of David Lynch's movies. It's not just a mathematical concept, but a powerful tool for understanding the human condition and the nature of reality itself. And as I continue to study and analyze Lynch's work, I can't help but feel that I'm on the verge of a major breakthrough. It was late in the evening, and I was trying my hardest to follow along with my group theory textbook while reviewing my notes. The concepts of symmetries and transformations were slowly starting to make sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I turned the page, a strange symbol caught my eye. It was unlike anything I had seen before in my studies, a series of intricate lines and curves that seemed to shimmer on the page. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, but the symbol remained. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed a piece of paper and tried to replicate the symbol. My hand moved almost on its own, as if guided by an unseen force. When I finished, I felt a chill run down my spine. The symbol seemed to pulse with energy, and I could swear I heard a faint whisper in the back of my mind. I pushed the textbook aside and focused on the symbol. The more I stared at it, the more it seemed to shift and change, revealing hidden patterns and meanings that I couldn't quite grasp. It was as if the symbol was a puzzle, and I was the only one who could solve it. Hours passed, and I was still hunched over the symbol, trying to decipher its secrets. The whispers grew louder, and I could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful surrounding me. I knew I should be afraid, but I couldn't tear myself away from the symbol. As the night deepened, the whispers became clearer. They spoke of a hidden world, a realm of pure mathematics and abstract thought, where the laws of reality could be bent and twisted to one's will. The symbol was a key, a gateway to this world, and I was the chosen one to unlock its secrets. I don't know how long I sat there, entranced by the symbol and the whispers, but when I finally looked up, the sun was rising, and the world outside my window seemed somehow different. The lines of my room were sharper, the colors more vibrant, and the air crackled with energy. I knew that I had crossed a threshold, that I had entered a new realm of understanding. The group theory textbook lay forgotten on the desk, its pages filled with mundane equations and proofs. But in my mind, I held the key to a world beyond the imagination, a world of infinite and hidden power. And so, I picked up my pen and began to write, the whispers of my hand as I transcribed the secrets of the symbol onto the paper. The first-person perspective had become a window into a new reality, and I was the one to open the door.